Alright everyone, well I wanted to do something very exciting today and go over all of the important information as well as just the general spotlight for a 100% fully free-to-play legendary that everybody is going to get in Raid Shadow Legends. And the reason why I'm able to do this video is because I actually got lucky and I got her early in a set of summons. And of course I'm talking about Scyl of the Drakes. Now if you're wondering how you are going to get her, well she is actually a reward from the daily logins. You'll see here if you go to 180 days, she is the final daily login reward. So just keep logging into the game consistently and eventually you'll have access to her for free without spending money, without having to get lucky with pulls or anything of that nature. So it's definitely going to be a champion you're going to want to know if she's important, if she's good, kind of what her uses are in the game, and that's what I wanted to go over today because I've actually got her to level 60. I 6-starred her, got her some gear on her, took her through some various areas of the game, and kind of did a little bit of exploration. So I wanted to go over her stats, her skills, her masteries, gear, combat, where and how to use her properly in a team, as well as just some other general information about her. So let's get right to it and let's start off with number 1, which is going to be her stats. Now, interestingly enough, she is a defense-based champion, which is great. Super happy about this because if you guys have been watching my videos for a while, you guys know how I feel about this, and a lot of people feel the same, but defense-based champions are just going to be the most useful champions, especially when you get to the mid and late game, because when you are building their defense, not only are you building them to be more tanky and defensive, but because their skills are going to scale off of defense as well, you're also building their offense and their DPS at the same time. So you're able to just primarily look for one thing in terms of your gear, which is, defensive-based stuff, and that's not going to be just building defense-based stuff, it's also going to be working on their damage. So you run into that issue in the mid and late game where, offense-based champions, they do a lot of damage, but if they're really squishy, they're just going to die really early, and of course, a dead champion's going to do no DPS, so that's no good. So she is a defense-based champion, and interestingly enough, I found a great comparison champion in terms of stats to take a look at is actually Razin Scarhide, because Razin Scarhide is also another defense-based champion, and you are going to have access to be able to get him in-game. Now, Razin's not quite as free as Scyl of the Drakes because you do have to go through a fusion in order to get him, but it's not limited time. He's not going to disappear like the Skull Lord will. You can just kind of get around to it on your own time, and it's still something that you will have access to. And Razin is another very, very good champion that serves a lot of incredibly important features in the game, and he is a defense-based champion who is also utility-based. He does a lot of damage, but he has a lot of, debuffs and other things that provide a lot of other usefulness to your team besides just offering raw damage. Very similar to Scyl of the Drakes. So if we take a look at Scyl of the Drake's stats here, let's take a look in the actual index because this will give you her stats without any kind of crazy modifications or gear or anything. So just her raw base stats, you'll take a look and see what they are here. And if we compare her to Razin Scarhide, you'll see that she actually has the upper hand on a lot of stats in comparison to him. So she actually does have more defense by a little bit, more HP, more base speed, and even a bit more base crit damage as well. But she is going to have a bit less attack and a bit less resist. But remember, because she and Razin are defense-based champions, the attack stat, it will still give you attack, but it's not going to be as important as the defense stat. That's really the primary one that you're going to want to be focusing on. So once more, let's go back to her just so you can get a bit of a comparison. You can always look at this in your own champion index as well to kind of get a comparison without any modifications, but her stats are indeed pretty solid. So now let's talk about her actual skills and her skill kit, because at first glance, it might not seem super amazing. She does definitely have some good skills, but her passive is absolutely phenomenal. And after doing some testing and kind of taking her out into actual dungeons and content, you guys will get to see this as well. Her passive is huge. It is absolutely insane how much support and utility it provides to your team. All right, let's get into our first skill. So Drake's Swiftness attacks one enemy, has a 20% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns, also has a 30% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 15%. So this is a very solid auto attack, and by that I mean it doesn't have a cooldown. So you're going to be placing this on enemies a lot, which means you're going to probably see a fairly consistent decreased speed debuff on pretty much any single target enemies that you're facing because it doesn't have a cooldown. You don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. It also does have that chance to decrease the target's turn meter as well, which is a nice little bonus. So very solid. You can increase the buff and debuff chance with skill books as well. Then you have her second skill, attacks all enemies 2 times. Each hit has a 20% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. You've got a 4-turn cooldown, and this is a great skill. And in my opinion, this is kind of the skill in our skill cut that really benefits from skill books the most, because stun is excluded from a lot of masteries that would normally benefit it. It's kind of one of those exclusions like unkillable and a lot of other stuff. But having that increased buff debuff chance in the actual skill books, plus having the ability to lower the cooldown down from 4 turns to 3 turns, definitely going to be one of those things to consider. Now, generally speaking, is she a champion that you're going to want to skill book? This really kind of depends on what your status is in the game. Like, if you are somebody who is completely free to play and you really don't see yourself getting a lot of legendaries in the game, and you're kind of starting to see those legendary skill books pile up, I'd say probably. But if you are somebody who, you are a whale, you spend a lot of money, you have a lot of other legendary champions, and skill books are really one of those things that it's just very difficult to even commit 1 or 2 skill books to a legendary champion, there might be other considerations that you're probably thinking of before Scyl of the Drakes. But this skill really benefits a lot. Now, her third skill, Phoenix Right, revives an ally with 50% HP and places a 50% ally protection buff on them for 2 turns. You can get that down to a 4-turn cooldown. So this is a strictly support-based skill, really useful in certain applications in the game. When you're kind of like doing farm content, though, especially when you're carrying food through, it could definitely get a little bit frustrating, but in a lot of areas of the game, this skill is going to pair very, very well with her passive, and this is the huge one. This is what, in my opinion, makes her skill kit really good, and that is Boundless Life. Heals all allies by 10% of their max HP at the start of each turn. Also places a 30% increased speed buff on a random ally for 2 turns. Now, the crazy thing about this is this really makes speed huge, because the more turns that she is taking relative to your party, as well as, of course, relative to your enemies, the more she's going to be able to activate this passive here, the more your entire team is going to heal. And it's kind of like, in a way, it's like a continuous heal on your entire team active at the same time. Not quite, but it's very, very powerful, and you'll definitely see how useful this is when you actually take her into a team. It might not seem, 10% might not seem like a whole lot, but every single turn that she takes, it adds up to be a massive boost to support for your team. So, alright, now let's get into her actual masteries, because this is one where I originally went through and I kind of went with similar masteries to Razin, because again, they both serve very similar purposes. They're both defense-based champions that are not just going to provide DPS, but they also provide a lot of utility. Razin is more utility in terms of like strictly debuffs, whereas Scyl of the Drakes does have debuffs, but she's also support and not just debuff utility. But they are both defensive, and I kind of modeled Razin for the Masteries, but after testing her out, I would actually maybe even make a few changes, but this is generally what I go with a good amount of the time. I almost always go with the offense tree and the support tree, because the defensive tree just generally doesn't seem to offer enough in comparison to these other two. But I want to start off with the support tree, because this is kind of the road where I would consider going down a little bit differently if you want to. I don't think this one is bad, but I think that there's another slight different variation that might be worth considering. So I almost always go with the additional accuracy, because, the flat amount of HP, it just doesn't seem worth it in comparison to the accuracy. Then I went down to here, increases accuracy by 20 when this champion has no skills on cooldown. Now, the other road that I'm talking about is actually right here, where I would even consider maybe not taking the accuracy or somehow getting the lay on hands, because this is going to actually increase the value of her heal by 5%, which is going to affect that mastery. So if you really want to get some extra healing, this is definitely consideration. If you are more interested in accuracy and just kind of sticking with the road that I took here, I don't think that it's bad. I just think this one is also worth considering. Now, the other one that kind of pairs along with this on the next line here is Rapid Response. Has a 30% chance of increasing the turn meter by 10% when a buff cast by this champion is removed or expired. This is actually a pretty big mastery for her because of her passive, right? Her passive is going to give a random person on your team a speed buff every single turn. And of course, those are going to be expiring, so you can really take advantage of that mastery right there, rapid response, in order to get some extra turn meters. So if you want to maybe skip the accuracy and somehow find a way to go down this road instead of going down on the right side, go down the left side instead, I think it's a very viable option. But continuing along, I think most of the rest of the masters that I picked are pretty in line with a standard choice. Of course, I almost always take Lore of Steel because we use basic sets a lot of the time because they're just really easy to gear and really easy to slot. Cycle of Magic just reduces cooldowns, which is really nice. You've got Lasting Gifts, 30% chance to extend the duration of any buff cast by 1 turn. And if you are going to pick between Lasting Gifts and Master Hexer, which is the debuff version, obviously if your champion has buffs or debuffs is an important consideration, but if they have both and you can only pick one, remember, very importantly, buffs are generally like the amount of turns that a buff lasts. If a buff lasts 3 turns and a debuff lasts 3 turns, generally the buff is going to feel like it lasts shorter because you have a lot more speed relative to your enemies. So you're going to be taking a lot more turns relative to them. So generally I like to go with the buff option because you're going to be cycling through your buff turns a lot quicker than your enemies are cycling through their actual debuffs. So that's kind of why I went through the Lasting Gifts choice. And I also went with Sniper for the extra 5% chance to apply debuffs. Now, unfortunately, it does not work on Stun, which is her second skill, but it will still work on her first skill right there. Now, in terms of offense, there's a couple of clear-cut choices. Obviously, the 5% extra crit chance over the 75 attack is almost an obvious one. You've got the crit damage as well, which is very, very important. Now, I took Grim Resolve, which has increased her damage when she has less HP. I think if you know that you're going to be using her to fight a lot of stuff with shields, I think this mastery is totally okay. It really just depends on how often you're fighting stuff with shields, like maybe more for the arena or whatnot. This one as well is an okay choice in circumstances, maybe more so in the arena as well, but it's very difficult to almost always have full HP. So I find like the Grim Resolve one is generally a little bit better. Now, in terms of the third line, single out, this mastery is going to be even better with the clan boss changes that are coming soon, but 8% extra damage when targets have less than 40% HP is just additional DPS, which is really nice. And I love the Life Drinker passive. I think it's pretty much always a must-have. This is kind of like a mini version of Lifesteal on a mastery. It's only when they have 50% HP or less, but that 5% will proc from things like War Master, and you could see some really, really big heals come from this. Then it's just pretty much going down to War Master, bring it down, increase damage with targets with higher HP, so additional DPS. Methodical gives you increased damage on the default skill, the auto attack, which of course you're going to be using the most because it doesn't have a cooldown, so that's just more DPS. And of course, War Master because she does not hit many, many times with her default skill. So a couple of other choices, of course, if you decide to go with the more PvP route, you can always go with things like, Ruthless Ambush, make a couple changes. If you are looking for stuff like this, Evil Eye is like a decent PvP skill because it lowers turn meter. There's obviously other choices to make, but this is just kind of a general guideline of the things that I went for. Again, pretty similar to my Razin Scarhide. All right, now gear. Let's talk a little bit about gear. And as a general, statement, is you can actually gear her pretty similar to Razin Scarhide because she kind of fills that similar role. And the important things to note about this are, of course, defense, because she's a defense-based champion, but also accuracy. You definitely do not want to neglect accuracy on her because she has a lot of skills that are very important. Her first skill has that decreased speed. It has that decreased turn meter. She also has her second skill as well, which has the stun. So if you neglect accuracy, you're not going to see benefit from those skills. So I decided to just go with Lifesteal and an accuracy set, mostly just because it was the gear that I had lying around. It was similar to the gear that my Razin had, and it let me do some testing here and there. Let's see what else. Speed is really important for her passive, so definitely try. Speed is kind of important for everyone though, but a really big note is because she's going to heal the entire team by 10% every time she takes a turn. The more speed she has, she's really going to benefit a lot. But besides that, kind of just gear her very similar to a lot of other defense-based champions. Don't focus too much on things like attack. Crit damage and crit chance are obviously very important as well, but building defense is not only going to build your tankiness and your survival, but it's going to build your damage as well because her skills do scale off of that. Now, I wanted to go through really quickly just a brutal run, just with some food, because this is kind of like an application and probably a part of the game that a lot of people farm a lot of. And then at the end of the video, what I will do is I will leave footage of her. I actually managed to get her on the second attempt. I didn't get it on the first attempt, but on the second attempt, I was able to get her to solo Minotaur 15 without any skill books or anything like that. So she does have that capability. It was a little bit hairy to start off, but, you know, with a little bit more refinement, if I were to take, you know, another day or so to really work on her gear and make some changes, maybe change her Masteries a little bit, I definitely think it would be a lot more consistent. But let's take a look at the actual campaign first, because this is going to be something that you're probably going to be farming quite a bit of in-game. So you'll see all of her healing, and you will see her actually revive one of the incubuses as well, which is why I said earlier, you can see how that skill might be a little bit annoying in like some farming situations, but definitely going to come in very handy in a lot of more progression-based content like dungeons and whatnot. She's got that revive again, and you'll see her healing, and you'll really notice that healing a lot from her passive when you see the Minotaur run. Now, yes, she does have a lifesteal set, but the healing just amplifies the total survivability of her and your entire team by an insane amount. So there is the campaign run. And now just generally, where are you going to actually fit her? Where does she kind of belong? Now, she is a bit similar to Razin. She's defense-based. And she does kind of serve that, does a good amount of damage and also a support utility, but she's more of like a support utility in terms of survivability and heals, whereas Razin is more of a support utility in terms of strictly debuffs and doing things to the actual enemies, because you've got the decreased defense, the weaken, you've got the turn meter, you've got the removes buffs. It's all enemy focused, whereas she does have debuffs, which are enemy focused, but she also has that increased speed buff and that heal. So you're going to want to slot her as a brand new player. First of all, I would say most people who get her, she's probably just going to go in pretty much any team, especially if you're still working on, you know, like dungeon progression. If you haven't gotten to a lot of the dungeon stage 20, she's probably just going to be useful in almost any team that you have. But for more, you know, end game players, any kind of team or situation where you feel like you have party members that are either dying consistently, inconsistently, or you need some extra support as well as DPS, her passive is going to be huge in that sense. If you feel like you have champions that, you know, you go through a certain number of dungeons and they're dying some of the time or all of the time, if you fit her in, you're going to notice that her passive is going to be the game changer between having your champions get really low in HP and dying a lot and actually staying alive and being able to contribute a lot more. That in addition to the solid amount of damage that she's going to offer as well. And the last thing that I want to end off here is that run through of her going solo at Minotaur 15. Now, of course, disclaimer, she has decent gear. This is not the best gear that I have available, but this is definitely good gear, probably better gear than a good amount of people have access to. She's fully leveled, she's fully ascended, and this was my second attempt, and you guys will see I did get it done, but it was a little bit hairy. If I refined her, would definitely have more potential, but she is a very, very solid champion, especially as a free-to-play. I'm going to end it off here, though. I'm not going to actually talk because it's about a 3-minute clip, so if you guys want to watch it, feel free, but I hope that this video was helpful and that you guys enjoyed, and with that all being said, thank you very much for tuning in, and yeah, I'll leave things off with this actual footage here of going through the Minotaur run.